Hello, my name's Les Dowdell and I'd like to welcome you to my bonsai collection. And bonsai is the art of trying to reproduce in miniature the look of a full-size tree. And this particular art started a long time ago, and it started in China. And the beginnings are, the details aren't that well known, but when people started collecting trees and bushes to bring down from the mountains and out from the woods, they'd have to put them in pots. And it could be for medicinal purposes, but also for decorative reasons. The Emperor of China is known to have landscapes of the whole country situated on his grounds, but also there are seasonal changes in the trees that he'd like to appreciate, such as having the cherries in bloom along the path that he usually walked. But once the cherries are finished, of course, the trees don't look that good, so his gardeners would bring in different trees for him to appreciate. And over the centuries, the habit of growing trees in pots spread from the emperor down into the middle class, and also with trade and exchange of cultural ideas, he went over to other countries such as Korea and Japan. Now, most people think of bonsai as coming from Japan, and that's mainly the result of various trade and military operations over the last century. Approximately 100 years ago, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a major exhibition of bonsai in London, and the Europeans really took hold of the idea of growing small trees in pots. After the Second World War, when the Americans came back from Japan, they also brought bonsai and the idea of bonsai to North America. Since then, it's spread all over the world, and just about every country that you can think of has somebody doing bonsai. As I've mentioned to a few people before, about the only place you can't do bonsai is down in Antarctica, where there are no trees. So any place there are trees, there are people doing bonsai. Now, each bonsai has a style. The different styles should reflect an environment that would produce that shape. Now, because it's trying to reproduce a full-size tree on a small scale, it should also, to some extent, reflect the environment that produced that tree. So in a nice quiet environment, you'll get nice formal uprights that are nice and symmetric. They don't look like they've undergone any hardships, and they're nice and quiet. But you get closer to the mountains or into regions with worse weather, you get windswept styles where the trees are all swept over, all the branches are directed in one to the left or the right. You get up in the mountains on the side of a cliff, and you have trees hanging off the cliff and cascading downward so that they don't grow upward any further. Of course, you can also change the number of trunks, because not all trees produce just one trunk. So you can get a multi-trunk style or a clump style. And as you get more adventurous, you can also, instead of just one tree in a pot, you can get multiple trees in a pot and simulate a small forest. I'm not sure what else. Now, here in Alberta, of course, we've got the 4 seasons. Some of them are only short, like spring's only about 3 days long. But the trees, because they're kept outside, go through all the regular seasonal changes. Present time, some of them are starting to change color for fall. And in another month or so, all the deciduous ones will have dropped their leaves. Any with fruit on them, the fruit's going to be nice and ripe, and whatever colors they have, like the crab apples, will be nice and showy as well. And usually when you're doing bonsai, to reflect the seasonal changes, you should, in general, try and use plants that are from the area that you live in. First of all, they'll survive all the seasonal changes, and they'll They have to be outside for the winter, because some people ask if they're inside for the winter. But they have to be outside for the winter so that they can respond to the temperature changes and the daylight day length changes, and come out and bud out properly in the spring, flower at the right time, and set fruit at the right time. So they go through all these changes so that in one species, like with an apple, you'll see it bare in the winter. In the spring, the leaves will come out and the flowers will come out, and you get a tree covered with flowers. During the summer, just the leaves are obvious, and then by the time fall comes along, the fruit is developing and are going to be the main focus at that time of year. And then the cycle begins again with the leaves all off and the fruit all fallen off, and we're back to the bare shape of the tree. With evergreens, of course, you're going to have the green needles or foliage available all year round, and you'll get to appreciate the shapes that way. And things like pines are usually a symbol in the Orient of long life, so that if you've got some evergreens, it's a nice indication that you can keep the color and the things alive all through all seasons of the year. One of my favorite trees, or one of my favorite species, is actually the larch. And it looks like an evergreen, but it's got needles on it, but it's actually a deciduous conifer, and it goes through all the seasonal changes as well. In the spring, the new buds open up with a nice bright fresh green, and then they harden off a little bit over the summer, and then you can hardly tell it from a spruce or a small leaf pine. But in the fall, the needles change to a nice golden yellow, and then they fall. And then you're left with the bare skeleton of the tree. So that you can still have the look of an evergreen during the summer, but all the different characteristics and changes that you'd see in a deciduous tree. There's also differences in size. There's size categories in bonsai. You can go from the very small ones where you can hold about half a dozen in the palm of your hand, up to the big ones where it takes 2 or 3 people to carry one tree or one pot, one bonsai, from one part of your garden to another. So that depending on the space you've got available, you can have just a small table with 20 or 30 bonsai on it, or you can have that same table with only one tree on it. But hopefully you've got enough of a backyard that you can spread them around and display them appropriately for yourself when you're walking around, taking care of them and appreciating them, or when you've got visitors coming over. So there's lots of different parts of bonsai to appreciate: the species of trees, the sizes, the styles, and of course the colors as the year progresses. And another lull in the conversation. Well, thank you for coming to my garden and looking at this part of it. This is only a small part, but it's my most interesting part, at least for me. And hopefully this little introduction to bonsai has gotten you intrigued a little bit, enough to get started at least looking into the subject and maybe trying out 1 or 2, because there's lots of things you can do with bonsai, and you can bring the forest and the other parts of the world into your backyard on a small scale.